Hi, y'all. Looks like we have a small crowd today, but that's okay. We'll be nice and personal. But hope you guys are having a good Wednesday. I'll probably give another minute or so just for people to trickle in. Okay, I am going to share screen. Okay, hopefully that shows up all right. Okay, I'm gonna start, but feel free to stop me anytime. And yeah, if the screen is showing good or if it's not showing good, let me know. And I think this one has a couple of demos. So if I need to zoom in or anything, feel free to let me know at any time. But yeah, thanks for joining me today. Today we're gonna teach JavaScript 2. So this is about DOM. So if you guys are caught up with lecture, JavaScript 1 was just the bare basics of JavaScript and how to use it. And then this one is more about what makes JavaScript specific to web development. So yeah, this will be an interesting lecture. I think I have a little bit of my own take on the DOM too that I'll give at the end, more conceptual based as well. So let me first talk about what is a browser. So what we wrote here, basically, the textbook definition is that it locates, displays, and retrieves content. So these are like web pages requested by a client from a server. So anytime you see something on your browser, it's grabbed. The browser looks for where the server is located. So the server can be like AWS or other tools, and it grabs from there all the data that you need to display onto your screen. And a lot of the times it is connected to HTML. So it first renders the index.html page. So that's like the very, very first top parent component that it renders. So to add a little bit more onto what I was talking about, you can host your website onto a server. So when it actually is deployed, you can put it onto GoDaddy, Bluehost, etc. And browsers makes a request to your server for index.html, as I mentioned before. Your server sends a copy of the file. Your browser reads the HTML and it sees the JS tag that's in there. So to specify, in order to connect your HTML to a JavaScript file, it's very similar to how you connect your HTML to a CSS file. Instead, you put into your script tags. So into your script tags, you'll put src equals whatever name of the JS file that you want. So in this case, a typical example is myscript.js. And then the browser requests for that file, sends the file to the browser, and then reads it and executes the code onto it. So let me talk more about what the document object model is. So the abbreviation is DOM. This is basically a data structure. So just like anything you learned in like 61B, if you take in that class, it's a whole data structure on its own, but it kind of gives the impression of kind of a tree structure. I can show you an image. So this is kind of how like the DOM looks like right here. In this format, it's more of like a parent-child kind of structure. And then in this format, it's more of like a tree structure. There's no like specific like way that people draw it, but either of these work. but this is just to give you guys a clue of what it looks like. As you can see, it kind of just takes all like the tags, all the elements of the HTML and lays it out in a very structured parent to child relationship. Let's go back. So it's a data structure that the browser will create upon loading a page. It consists of elements and nodes, and it's made up of HTML tags and their content. Each tag is a different object, and it has all their children, as I mentioned before. So this is an idea of how HTML looks like, and each of these elements would be a individual node on your DOM kind of tree structure. So you can traverse through the DOM, just like a tree. You can go down it, and it has a parent-child relationship, and there's a root. So at the very top, we have like the HTML, the head, and it can have a leaf, as not a leaf, but like, I guess equivalent to a leaf would be like the very last bottom child. So I think if this will load, I can show you guys maybe like a DOM, I guess, structure of how it kind of looks like if you translate it to from HTML to the DOM. So, okay, I have not used this website before, so I'm just gonna wing it, but hopefully it works. Okay, let's see if we have the divs here. We can try to put hello here. So as you can see, it gives a child under the body, and I forgot to write the body, but I guess it automatically wrote that for me. And in that we have like the text hello. And maybe we could put something inside of it just to see what it gives us. We can do H2 in here. Can just say, hey. So as you can see, this one would be under the div. So just like that, it creates a very tree-like structure. Okay, let's continue on. Like this, okay. So back to here. So the DOM is basically what you can use to grab the HTML and grab what you want to change to the HTML. So as we mentioned earlier, JavaScript is kind of like the logic behind a lot of your code. So the HTML is the bare structure, the CSS is the style, and the JavaScript is how you actually have a lot of the logic and the data manipulation. So in order to do so, we can use the DOM to grab the elements from the HTML and change their CSS, change their functionality, change resizability. There's a ton of things that you can do with JavaScript. So some of these that were listed, I mentioned before, you can resize your window, you can add transitions, you can make a lot of interactions such as checkboxes, hovering, etc. So before I want to move on, I kind of want to talk about the purpose of the DOM. This is something that a lot of people I feel like find out later, but I feel like it's important to know like why you need to learn the DOM now. A lot of the times, this is like vanilla JavaScript, and a lot of times in a real like industry like code base, you don't actually directly manipulate the DOM. A lot of the times there would be like a framework in front end that you would use instead of directly manipulating the DOM, such as React, Angular, Vue. And those are kind of like have like for example, React has this idea of a virtual DOM. So you don't have to directly interact with the DOM, and it kind of has a layer of abstraction. But the reason why a lot of people teach vanilla JavaScript and the reason why you should know vanilla JavaScript is for like the bare basics knowledge of how a browser connects to your code, as well as a lot of the times you do actually need to use vanilla JavaScript. For example, I haven't personally used it myself, but web components, if you've ever heard of that, they directly use vanilla JavaScript. And that's because they want the web components to work amongst any code language and everywhere. And that's just because a lot of the time, different code bases have different languages, but at the end of the day, JavaScript is core to every single website. So it's good to know the bare basics instead of like hopping around between different languages. Yeah, I think that's like kind of my 2 cents on that. So definitely, if you're interested in also like maybe web development as an industry, or like a career, a lot of the times, like for an interviews, like they would directly ask you to use JavaScript to edit your code instead of using React. So depending on that, like if you're interested in that as well, that is also another reason to make sure you have a good foundational understanding of JavaScript. Yeah, okay. So the document object is the first thing that I want to talk about. The document object is kind of your bare like bread and butter of what you need to know for the DOM. It's kind of just like how you can even access the DOM. So what we have listed here is a globally available variable to modify the DOM and interact with the HTML and CSS. And there's tons of methods available. And actually, I haven't seen the website in a while, but I can actually see if we can show you how the website looks like. I believe it's listed in here. Maybe we can just kind of see what kind of structure they have. But yeah, so they do talk about the DOM, its properties, it's a lot of different properties that it has, and a lot of different functions you can use within here. So if you ever, I think throughout this lecture, you'll notice that there's a lot of very nitty, like gritty phrases that the DOM uses. And a lot of times it's hard to memorize. So if you ever forget, it's all accessible through this document. And if you ever are curious, if you just have a quick like Google search, it will pop up as well. So it's not something you have to memorize. Cool. Okay. Let me see. All right. So let's talk about some of the methods. As I mentioned before, there's tons of methods, but we can go over some that I think are pretty essential to know. So we have document.querySelector. So this method is basically a very general way in which you can grab any HTML component. So it can take tags, it can take IDs, it can take classes. It really can take anything. It doesn't need to be like very specific, but it allows us to modify any elements, CSS, and properties. So what does it say here? Returns the first element. Oh yeah, that's something else to know as well. There is something called querySelector_all, which returns all of the elements into an array. But in terms of a lot of the times you just want to get the first elements, querySelector by itself just gets the first element that you need, that is whatever you called. So if you called like a dot, for example, your class is called dot style. If you do dot style, it's going to grab the first dot style class or first style class that you see. And then if you have like multiple style classes, it's just going to grab the top one. Here is an example of how you can use it. So we have within the script tag, so this is your JavaScript, we have const red square equals to document. So that's the document object that I mentioned earlier. Dot query selector, that's your method. And then red square is your actual selector that you're grabbing from the class name of HTML. So in this case, it's grabbing the red square right here. And as you can see in the CSS, it is literally, the width and height isn't too important, but the background color is what we're changing here. So it's crimson, but we want to do red square dot style dot background color and change the crimson to lime green. So in that way you can access this HTML, change the CSS into a different color. That's one thing that you can do with the JavaScript. Yeah, let me see if we have any questions so far. So someone says, wait, is this for HTML or CSS? So this is for JavaScript. So neither, I guess they're all interacting together, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but JavaScript is its own thing on its own language. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, your HTML is your structure, your CSS is your style, and your JavaScript is how you can manipulate the logic. And in order to get the logic, a lot of the times you need to grab the specific structure or the specific style, and that's what you use document object model for. So I'm going to talk about the next method, document.getElement by ID. This is essentially the same thing as query selector, but the difference is that it's a lot more specific. So instead of getting like tags, classes, or IDs, This gets particularly IDs, and this is very common method to use, so I'm just gonna mention it here, but it should be pretty similar to before. It returns the first element as well. It takes in an ID and only an ID, and it allows us to modify the element CSS and properties, just like last time. So as another example, as you can see here, it's document.get element by ID, and this ID's name is demo. And then .inner.html or inner.html is a method that I feel like it's also something that oftentimes you just find by searching online, but this is a very fairly common one. And what it does is basically change the text. It changes your HTML. So oftentimes it's used to change text, if that makes sense. So in this case, we want to change whatever demo's text was to be hello world instead. So maybe demo said hello universe, and then we did get element by ID demo.inner HTML equal hello world, then hello universe will change to hello world, if that makes sense. And another syntactical thing that you might notice is that in this get element by ID, there's no dot or anything, it's just demo. That's because it's always an ID, versus here you can see a dot before. That's because in this case, you're grabbing a class. And as I mentioned, you can grab classes or pretty much anything with query selector. Yeah, okay. So kind of like what I mentioned before, there are a lot of things you can do after grabbing an element. You can change inner HTML, which changes the text. Inner HTML, there's two things. There's one called inner HTML and one called inner text, I believe. Some people get confused between them. It's not that big of a deal if you get confused, but inner HTML is just, it allows you to grab the HTML, so you can change it and add like a bold bracket around it, versus inner text is literally just changing the text and nothing else. That's the two kind of differences, but a lot of the times they're interchangeable. Then we have element.style. That's how we can change the style. Another example is right over here. Background color is also something that you might have to refresh your CSS if you don't remember the name of that. And you can change its class name as well. If you want to change a class name to be demo1 to demo2, you can change it like that, and a lot more things. So there are a lot of other methods that I'm not going to go into too much. I actually haven't used these in a long time, but things, I do see them once in a while. They're called get elements by class name. So this basically gets all the elements by their class names or whatever you specify in the class name, and it returns an array. Same for the tag name, except it's for tag this time. And create elements, I think it's in our demo that I'm going to show you next, but this is basically when you have to create a new element. So a lot of the times if you're doing like a button, a lot of the times after you click a button, something else is going to pop up. That's a new thing. For example, you want to create a new div that pops up after your button is clicked. Maybe you want to have a pop-up that comes up after your button is clicked. Stuff like that can be easily done with create elements. I will show you that in a demo in a bit. Yeah, let's see. So let me pull up this demo. And let me look at the comments or look at the chat. So it said, is there a default ID when we don't assign an HTML tag in ID? Oh, that's a good question. There is not a default ID. However, if you are trying to grab a tag, you don't necessarily need an ID. For example, if you want to grab header ones and you want to change all the header ones, you can grab header one just like that. So I can show you, let me hide this. Let me go back to the slides. Let's see. In this case, you might be thinking about query selector, since that's the one that allows you to not have an ID. So for query selector, if you want to grab something or change the header to all header twos like colors, you can do h2 like just put h2 in here, and you can do like h2.red square instead. So yeah, you don't have a default ID, but there's ways to work around that if you're just trying to change the whole tag, if that makes sense. Okay. All right, I'm gonna take a, we'll give like a 3-minute break because this lecture is a little bit hefty, so we'll come back in 3 minutes. Okay. Oh, okay. I don't know why I lost Zoom for a second, but okay, I am back. Let me know if you guys can't hear or see me. And if everything's good, I will continue. Okay, so I've pulled up a little demo here. So in this case, we kind of already wrote out a little bit of the demo that you needed to see. Just to run through it, we have your HTML, we have these div tags, which just have the word introduction, the class red text, which is basically just making the color of the text red. We have blue text, which is making the color of the text blue. And then we have red text, which is again making it red. And then, yeah, just to show it just being displayed, we have, wow, it's really ugly, but we have introduction here, body 1 here, and body 2 here. So I'm gonna go through some of the actual methods that you can use. So if we create var elements, just call it element or elem, we can grab it using the documents dot query selector. And let's see what we want to change here. So maybe in our case, we can maybe use what I talked about earlier. So we want to change all the header twos. We can change header 2 to be a red text. And then we have that there. And then we want to grab all of the ones that have red text. And let's say we want to change it to have like pink text or something. So in order to do that, we have the element that we want to grab. Now we have to add our stylistic changes, which we can do by lm style dot color equals pink. And that's kind of how you would be able to do it, except it's not doing it. Let me see if there's a way to run it here. Not too familiar with this environment. Let's see. Okay, there we go. There's a run on the top left. Okay, so we have the pink colored. If you notice, it changed from red to pink. That's one way you can use query selector. Let's see, we can also try to use get element by ID in an example. So again, let's do that. Document dot get element by ID. In our case, let's try to use maybe introduction up here. And then let's change that element. Actually, I should probably call it something different. So element 2, let's change the text of it. So as I mentioned before, there's inner HTML. Inner text will also work just fine. And we can change that to welcome. Let's run that now. So it was really ugly, so you can barely tell, but introduction changed to welcome now. Yeah, so that's just a couple of things you can do. Already went through inner HTML. I think style you guys got down as well. But something that I want to mention is class name. So you can change a class name if you want to. So for example, you can change class name over here to be, maybe you want to change the element 2s. Instead of red text, you want it to be blue. So in that case, you can do, what's the name of the class? So we call it blue text. So let's change that to blue text. Now let's give it a run. Yeah, so now we have, we showed the possibility of being able to change the class name. And in that way, we can change the whole, it doesn't have to be a specific style. It could be the whole category of styles, if that makes sense. Yeah. In terms of create elements, I can show you guys how you can create a new element. Let's call this var element 3, document.create element. And inside of here, we can create a whole nother div. All right, so in our div, let's change the style. So as we mentioned, you can change the color with .style.color, and you can change it to be green. Other things you can change the background color. So let's do element 3.style.background color. You can change it to be black. Other things you can change, as we mentioned before, inner HTML. We can do that really quick. So let's change inner HTML. You can change this to be called new elements. Yeah, and then lastly, the key thing to note is that there is this thing called document.body.append child. This is, honestly, there's so much method names, so that's also something that I had to search up prior to this lecture. But append child basically is your way for you to add this new element onto your document, one of your tags, bodies. So that's just something to maybe like search up whenever you're confused. But yeah, that exists, and you can just add element 3 here. If that goes okay. Oh, it's not showing up. Let's see, maybe I forgot a, let's see. Oh, I think this is a mistake. It shouldn't be .style. It should just be inner HTML. I know it gets confusing sometimes. I literally have to search it up all the time. But yeah, in this case, inner HTML is enough. And then you can get new element set to the text. Because in this case, you're not changing the CSS, you're changing the HTML directly. So you don't need .style, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that's just kind of a demo of some small things you can do. Are there any questions? So we have, does JavaScript always come after HTML, CSS in terms what runs last? Okay, let me see. So JavaScript, I believe, I'm not too particularly sure, but I believe it does come last. So it needs to detect which tags are available. So the HTML is already going to be rendered. The CSS is already going to be rendered. Then the JavaScript kind of has to access what's already available. So I'm assuming that it is what runs last. Then we have another question. So when you did append child element 3, it created the new div in the body of the HTML. Yes, so it does create a whole new div. So basically, it would add that whole thing onto your current code without directly changing your code base, if that makes sense. So it says, even though body tag was not HTML. Even though body tag was not HTML. So the body tag is implicitly there. So I think in that way, like document.body is just always adding it to the HTML. It's not like we have to write body there. So yeah, it is directly adding it to the HTML. We just can't see it in our code, but like, yeah. So we see, if you inspect the page, do you see, that's a good question. I'm actually unsure. Let me take a look. From what I am assuming, do you see the newly added HTML? I don't believe it will be in your code, but let's take a look. Unsure. So let's see. Here. So we have, oh, so it does actually add. So I think that makes sense. So actually, I'm assuming that it isn't going to show in your code, but it's literally going to add it there. So when it actually renders, it's going to appear on this side, if that makes sense. So it's not going to appear on what you personally write, but it's going to appear after it renders, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's cool. Cool to test these little logical things out once in a while. Yeah, so I think that kind of wraps up that demo. We can continue on. So there is an idea of modifying multiple elements at once. Sometimes it's not just taking one particular element, you want to take multiple and change all those at once. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, but there is such thing as like query selector all. So we can use that to grab, for example, all of these classes over here. They all have the same class, so you can just grab all of them. And it is an array, so you do have to use a for loop to go through it. And you can change all their inner text to be modified by JavaScript instead of unchanged. So that's one way you can change all of them at once. Just do keep in mind that you would be returning an array. And what's here? So it says use a loop. Yeah, that is pretty much what I talked about. Yeah, so the window object. Let's talk about that. So the window object is the very, very top. It's the parent object of the document object and the absolute topmost object in the DOM. So kind of in that tree structure that I shown before, the very top would be your parent, would be the parents, which is the window object. And I believe the second to top would be the document object. The window object is basically it's literally your window. A lot of the times you want to focus on a certain window, you want to resize a certain window. I feel like nowadays it's not very likely for you to like resize a window, but it's just good to know that that does exist and that is top of the whole DOM tree. So yeah, it just represents the open window of a browser. And you can use window objects to create and manipulate windows in our browser. So I'm gonna skip over this demo and maybe bring it at the end because personally, we have it in our lecture, but I don't think it's very often times in which you have to change your windows, but I can show you guys at the end maybe. Events and listeners is something that I think is really important and something that you guys should definitely pay attention to. So events is basically every time you want some action to happen. So most of the time, this is when you click on something. This could also be a keyboard press. Sometimes you want something to happen after someone lets go of a key. So these are just a few of the so many things that exist in the events life. But yeah, it's basically every time something happens, an event is created. So listeners are how you can change those events. So we respond to these events by having what are called event listeners. We give an event listener a function to run whenever an event happens. So I can show you how this works. Yes, okay. I am going to prepare the demo really quick. I have to pull up VS Code. So meanwhile, I'm going to do a 3-minute break. So we'll come back at 7:20. Okay, let me make sure everything is set up. Okay, so pulled up VS Code. Hopefully this is looking good. You guys can see the demo on the left and the code on the right. If there are any problems, do let me know. Feel free to unmute yourself as well. Cool. Okay. So I'm going to basically talk about how you can add an event listener. So to do so, I've kind of already created a little bit of HTML code. And now I'm going to add a couple of things like the buttons. Let's add button. We can use 2 of them for now. And then in our button, we're just going to call this button 1. Then we can call this button click me. And then I'm going to assign an ID to this button 1, button 1. And then I'm going to assign a class name to this. So we can call this event button. Just setting up what we need for our demonstration. So I believe this was talked about in the JavaScript lecture, but you can actually, you're supposed to put your script into like a different source and link it to here. But for most demo sake, it's just very difficult to switch between files and for students to keep track of that. So we're actually gonna just have a script tag where we can put all of our JavaScript. But just so you guys know, usually it's not usually inside the HTML. It's usually in an external file, just like CSS. Okay, so we have our script here. Now we can access the document. So document dot, as we mentioned before, there's get elements by ID, which nicely pops up on its own if you have VS Code. And let's get the ID, which is here. And as I mentioned before, you don't need any periods or anything because we know that it's an ID. Actually, let me put this down here so it's more readable. Now let's add an event listener. Let's do a click. This is your most common event. And in this, let's create a function where we can let's create a function. And the easiest thing that's used in a lot of demos is an alert because that's just the fastest thing to create. I'm not sure if this was taught, but if you ever want to have any logic within your string, you always use a backwards tag. Rather than normally if you have a regular string, you just use quotes. But since we do want to have logic this time within it, we're going to use a backwards tag. And we can just do you clicked on, let's change this into a logic, which this is the syntactic way to do so. I'm not sure if it was taught. And in order to grab the inner text of this target event, the way to do that, which is something that is good to memorize because this is used quite frequently, is events.target.innerText. Okay, so let's see if our buttons are appearing. Oh, maybe I gotta save. Okay, so if you see, if we click on button 1, it's gonna say you clicked on button 1. And the reason that the button 1 shows up that way is because we got the inner text of that event button, if that makes sense. Any questions with how we used add event listener or get element by ID? If not, I'm going to comment this out and show you how to do the exact same with a class instead. So we can do var button documents.query selector. We can put into .event button, and I believe there's a comment. Let me see. So it says, what is the event parameter set to? So that's a good question. It's not particularly set to anything. You have to put the events parameter here because add event listener is basically grabbing an event that you kind of assume that is happening because of the clicked. So this is kind of something that you can do all the time. Just assume that there's always going to be an event in here because that's just something that's passed in automatically through add event listener. So I think for most of the time, you just put an event here. Sometimes you don't even have to use the events, but it's always automatically given. And then dot target, I'm not sure exactly what it does. I'm pretty sure it just like specifically grabs that. That's also something that I've just automatically drilled into my head. And then inner text grabs like the actual text, as I mentioned before. Hopefully that answers the question. So var button, we're going to grab, yeah, of course. We're going to grab events button. We can do add events listener. And then we can change that to a click function. Yet again, we can have a function here and we can do alerts. And this could just be, hi, how are you doing? Smiley face. Okay, so this is basically just a demonstration to show that you can do the exact same thing with class name and query selector. And hopefully it should work. Let's take a look. Close this. Oh, something's not working. Let me take a look. Maybe I forgot. Colon. Oh. Event button, click function. Let's see. Let's put that there as well. Maybe this has to be class. Oh, yeah, sometimes class name does not work. I think the thing you should be using is class, but I think class name is like deprecated or something. So yeah, that's just another way to show that you can do this with a class as well. Okay, let's continue onwards with these slides. This onto slideshow. Oh, please go. Let's see. Actually, maybe. Do I really want to exit out though? Okay, fine. I'll exit out. Okay. Alrighty. Where am I? Okay, so inline event handlers is also something that does the exact same thing as adding events listeners inside of your script. But with onClick, something to keep in mind is that you can only assign one event at a time. So if you assign another event to onClick, you will overwrite the first event. So kind of to show how this works, this is how we've previously done it. So we just directly added get element by ID, directly added add event listener. And this is one way that works perfectly fine. Another way to do it, because we wanted to show you as many ways as possible for you to know everything that exists out there. You can do an onClick function, just like what we taught in HTML lecture. Add a my function, and then within your script, you can just directly call that function. And in this way, you don't have to directly do documents dots, because this is how it kind of grabs the document already, because it's already within that line. So 2 ways to do it. It's good to know both ways. So event delegation. Event delegation is more of like a conceptual thing. And sometimes you do see that it is pretty useful to know. But event bubbling is something that's a key idea of JavaScript. Basically, the idea is that if it functions from the inner node, that's the most specific, and then it goes all the way out to the very end of the very top of the DOM. So let's see what this says. After firing click handler attached to a target, the browser moves one level upward and executes any click handler attached if there is any. And it keeps moving one level upward until it reaches root. So to show you here, it's going to look if there's a handler here. If it's not, it's going to go up and then up and then up and then up. Yeah, so it starts from the lowest level is basically the point of event bubbling. And this can get very complicated. And that's something I was just giving a very, very simple version. But yeah, that's definitely something that's important to know. Okay, another demo. This lecture has so many demos. Let's go back. Okay. I have to pull up JavaScript again. All right, I'm gonna stop share and pull that up. If you have any questions, feel free to ask right now. So I see someone has asked, how do I track JavaScript typing? Okay, I can actually pull up a demo really quick. I can show you right now about how you can do that. Let me just set up. My laptop can like hold like 10 tabs at once. It's really sad. So that's why I have to pull it up every single time. This here. So I see a question that says, what if an element has events on multiple levels? Let me picture. So you're saying if an element has, okay, so I'm assuming you mean like there are multiple events being called in the child and the parents above. So it just calls it from the bottom up. Cool, yeah, so it will just call it in order. So basically from the bottom, the most specific inside node, all the way up to the parent. And then, yeah, I am trying to pull up a demo right now for the JavaScript typing. Give me a second. Okay. Yeah, I think we are good. Let me continue to share screen again. So, desktop. I'm not sure if that worked. Let me try. Okay, hopefully you guys are seeing this okay. Yeah, so apologies for that. My laptop is ancient, so it takes a lot of work to set this up. Okay, but I got it pulled up again. Let's just remove all of that. I don't think we'll need that. Okay, so I kind of want to show a demonstration of what you can do when you want to type, as someone has asked. So let's create a button here. We can just keep this. Actually, we might not even need the button. let's first add an input tag. So this is usually when you are having a form or something where you need input. It's very common to have like an input tag. So we can have like a placeholder where we can see type here. And then we can do a class name, input. That's all, input. Okay. And then, yeah, I think that's kind of that. Hopefully that makes sense. Everyone knows what an input does. Maybe I can just refresh to see if that shows anything. Yeah, so this is how an input looks like. Okay, so in our JavaScript, actually, before I get into that, let me create a paragraph tag. So what I'm going to try to do right now is basically have whatever you type into here displayed on the bottom. And in order to do that, every time a person lets go of a key, I want it to reflect into the bottom as well. So it kind of live time reflects what you're typing. But sometimes that does have to happen in websites. So this is like a real life example of how that can look like. So to do that, I'm going to have a p tag as well. Doesn't really matter what this is called. We can call p copy. And then we can just say, just call this nothing has happened. Nothing has happened yet. Okay, so we have that. And then inside of our script tag, we're going to make a var input document.query selector. And then I'm going to change this to become input to copy. We can put into here input to copy. Don't forget the dot. And then we're going to create a var paragraph as well. Document.query selector. Then we can do dot p copy. Okay. So we have that, and now we're going to try to add our event listener. So we're going to do input.add event listener. And then now this is different from click because now we're going to do on every single key up. So there is a term for that. It's called key up. This is also something you can search on your own. And just to clarify if that was confusing, key up is every time you click on a button and let go. It's going to recognize that as an event. So we're going to have a function here. And then we can do paragraph.inner text equals input.value. So we're just going to change all the inner text to be the new value that's being given. Let's see if that works. Ideally, oh, that's not working. Let me save that. Okay, so as you can see here, it's live time reflecting what I'm writing. And if that isn't clear, like about the key up thing, basically my key is on J right now, but when I like let go, then it appears as J. So that's just one key. I think there's key down as well, if I'm assuming that's a thing as well. But yeah, that's just one way you can manipulate like an input and text in JavaScript. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, and then something else that I wanted to show you is kind of about that event bubbling thing. So we can have the exact same thing here, but instead let's have a multiple buttons. And then let's change all of these buttons to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we don't need any of these classes. So I'm going to delete all of these. Okay, so we have a bunch of buttons. And what I'm going to do is wrap all of these buttons up into a class that I'm going to call button container. Cool. Okay, and inside of our script, let me take this out. We're going to first create a document, .query selector, get the button container. Okay, and then we're also going to add an events listener. And inside of here, we're going to change a quick function. We're going to create a function with an event where we're going to add another alert. So this is kind of basically what we did before as well, except I want to show you the idea of the events bubbling. Okay, so this has been created. Let's save that and refresh. Oh, that did not work. Let me see. What am I missing? We have document, query selector, add event listener, have our alert. See. Oh, someone has nicely mentioned that I have spelled target wrong. Let me fix that. Thank you guys. All right, let's refresh. Awesome. Okay, nice catch. So now you can see with everything that you click, it changes the number. So basically what this is trying to demonstrate is that you don't have to have the class name to be like in each individual tag. You can have it as the parents and it's still going to change everything inside of it, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's something to be careful of because a lot of times your bugs and stuff can be a problem because of a parent container. So that's something that I think is important to show. But yeah, I think that kind of wraps up what I was trying to say in my demo. Thank you guys for finding my error. That means you're paying attention. It was a trick. Just kidding. No, but thank you guys. And that is, I believe, nearing the end. Let's see if there are any other slides. But yeah, I think that kind of just wraps up most of it. Yeah, and at the end, just a reminder, this is vanilla JavaScript. In the future lectures, you're going to learn React. And that's going to be able to teach you a lot about how to actually use a framework to manipulate the DOM. And also you're going to realize that JavaScript is really, really tedious and React helps save a lot of that time away. Like this is, as you probably tell, like this is kind of annoying, selecting every single thing, adding every single event. It's very, very tedious and React makes it a little bit better. So that's something to look forward to. But yeah, thank you guys for sticking with me in this lecture. If you have any questions about anything, I can answer it right now. If not, feel free to go.
Can I ask a question about the homework?
Yeah, is it related to your specific homework?
It's so for homework 2, I'm looking at question 6, and I don't seem to, I couldn't find the textbook or like the slides that explains how we can approach this.
Let me take a look. Let's see if it rings any bells. Sorry, I will get your hand really quick, Colleen. Give me a second. So in question 6, okay. So I think for this one, the easiest way to do it, I think might honestly just be like using like a width percentage. You can change the width percentage. If not, I know some students were struggling with that, and then they asked if it's okay to manually compute it, which is fine as well. You can also manually compute it to be like 60% smaller too. Yeah, did you have any specific question?
Actually didn't get any of the things you said. What do you mean by manually
Okay.
computed?
So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this question asks you to change the size of the rectangle, right? Like you want it to be a smaller width. So,
So like we want to, so
uh-huh.
there are two rectangles and we want to set them 10 pixels apart.
Oh, for this part, yeah, for this
Yeah.
part, it should be as simple as doing like a margin left 10 pixels or margin right 10 pixels. And that should be able to kind of split up the rectangle a bit. Does that kind of
Um,
answer your question?
I believe I tried it. Should that be in the margin container class?
Um, I don't particularly remember the margin container because I wasn't haven't seen the homework in a while, but I think if you take the entire flag, the whole component of the flag, and then do a dot right or dot left on it, equal to 10 pixels, that should be able to give that margin space that you need.
Um,
So
is it okay if I share my screen?
yeah, of course. I think actually I'm going to, I'll answer your question in a bit. I think I should end the lecture because I don't have ability to pause. Oh, I